Well, I think that, one of the things that's so exciting about a panel like this and an opportunity to talk with a group like all of you, right? Community members, faculty, staff from Connecticut College, and of course students, right? Is that all of us have a connection to stories and experiences of migration and immigration. That's certainly my case. As a professor, I teach classes about immigration and migration, right? People crossing borders, people moving within national borders, moving to people before national borders existed. And I'm often asked, why do you care about this? Why do you study Latin America? Why do you teach classes about immigration and migration going back into the 16th century, the 17th century, the 18th century? And I think a big part of it is the fact that when I grew up, right, born into a family that originated mainly in upstate New York, and the last couple of generations, but before that, hailed from different parts of Europe, propelled by different push factors, drawn here by different pull factors, right, that led them eventually to settle in upstate New York. In German Lutheran communities via Canada, and Italian American communities via New York City. Some of them ended up in Buenos Aires, some of them ended up in New York, right? Some of the ones in South America we've kind of lost touch with, right? We've lost touch with people back in Calabria, which is where they initially came from in southern Italy, right? So I grew up with stories about people in movement. I grew up with stories about people struggling to be accepted, people rejecting the idea of being called Italian American because you need to be fully American, assimilationists, right? So my name went from being Leonardo, or could have been Leonardo Giovanni Garofalo, to being Leonard John, because my grandfather was an assimilationist, right? He went to primary school not speaking English, right? Speaking Italian, and being whipped, being beaten by the teachers for not speaking, right, English when he was in school, a language he didn't know, right? So his strategy was always to be as more American than anybody else, right? And that meant he might listen to opera, he might speak Italian with my great aunts and uncles, but he wouldn't actually use it at home with his own kids. And having married a German Lutheran woman, right, who spoke German at home, right, English became the common language for them, right? Neither of their churches, neither the Lutheran Church nor the Catholic Church, wanted to marry these two. So they joined a different church. They joined the United Brethren, no longer exists now, and formed their own way of being American. But being American and being considered white and acceptable Americans meant erasing that ethnic heritage, erasing those languages, right? So do you think I speak German or Italian from those families, from that rich heritage? No, that was shed, right? So when I teach these themes, I also think about these themes, right? Because they've shaped the experience of my family, because they've shaped the experience that they've had in this country. They've enriched that experience, but it's also been an experience of trauma and so forth, right? Certainly by the time I got to college, it was cool to be Italian American, right? In the 1990s, it was cool to be quote unquote ethnic, right? Now we're in another moment, right, where that kind of xenophobia and hostility and fear, right, and hatred is not only given greater free reign, it's also given greater space, even in our institutions of education, in our neighborhoods, even in our families, right? And so I feel like, once again, as often happens in U.S. history and in the history of everywhere in the Americas, because the Americas is made up of people moving and people arriving. And the indigenous populations moved within the Americas, right? And I'm sure that that's been the experience of many of my colleagues. Willie, I know we've often talked about, you know, our own family experiences that shape. Some people think we're Latin American. It's only because we think about Latin America. We think about Latin American's relationship to ourselves, oftentimes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. So. My background is Armenian American, and my grandparents came over during the genocide of the Armenian population in 1915. So my maternal grandfather was 19 years old at the time, and my grandparents were engaged. My grandmother was 17. She stayed in Armenia, waited for him to come over and establish himself, and then he brought her over. In the meantime, he brought over his brothers and cousins and so forth. That's the way it worked. You all passed through Ellis Island, and as he was passing, and my other grandfather as well, I've kept my maiden name, Kushigian, which was a lot longer when my grandfather came through Ellis Island. They said nobody's going to be able to pronounce that, so they took out a lot of the consonants and changed his first name, Americanized his first name, but if you go to Ellis Island to the museum, you can still see the original names that they came in with. So when they came in, my maternal grandparents went to New York and settled, and my paternal grandparents went to New Haven. So that's my connection to Connecticut. I feel like I'm an immigrant myself. I moved from New York to Connecticut when I finished my graduate work. And people always ask me where I'm from. I say New York, and they say, well, where are you from originally? And I said, New York, right? That's the place. It's not Latin America, even though I teach Latin American literature and culture, right? And a variety of other topics as well. So when we talk about immigration in our courses, in my literature courses, I'm also talking about environmental justice, right? I'm talking about how these different immigrants brought so much to different areas of Latin America. This semester I'm teaching a course in Islam and Judaism in the Hispanic world. We started off with the Middle Ages, but then moved to contemporary Latin America. So we've looked at how those populations migrated from the East and landed in different countries, sometimes hostile countries, in Latin America. They're still feeling the effects of anti-Semitism or the concern of xenophobia and the concern about the others. But if it weren't for my grandparents having to leave Armenia, I wouldn't be here, obviously. I would have had a very different life. We did not
have a longer name.
And a longer name, a longer last name. And we didn't have relatives that survived, or either they migrated or they didn't survive. My great grandfather was an Armenian priest, and that was highly respected at the time. In the Armenian Orthodox Church, the priest can marry, and so he had a large family, and unfortunately he didn't survive the genocide, but my grandmother did, and she came to this country and settled in New York. And they formed lots of social organizations, Armenian American organizations. They kept the native language, but as in Leo's case too, when my mother was walking on the street with her grandparents, don't speak in Armenian. Even though they were living in an Armenian neighborhood, right, where everybody spoke. You could go into the stores and everybody was speaking Armenian. It's still, they wanted to be American. They wanted to share that how grateful they were to be safe and to be in this country. So that obviously has affected who I am today, and also my research on all of the different immigrant flows from Europe, from the Middle East, going through Northern Africa as well, into Spain, and then from Spain to Latin America. So for me, it's been a part of my identity and who I am, my past, and hopefully my future as well.
I am just delighted to have made the acquaintance of my new best friends here, people whom I met for the first time just over the past month. In response to Jose's question, how has migration shaped your sense of identity and belonging? There's so many different bits and pieces that would go into that I'm just going to give you the list as it first occurred to me. One, I'm the executive director and chief curator of the Mystic Museum of Art. Speaking of genocide, the museum is built on Pequot land, and that is largely not recognized. And certainly the language has disappeared. The Mashantucket Pequot Museum and Research Center are devoting themselves to trying to reconstruct their language and to collate the lore that has been dispersed. They have been reaffirmed as a tribal nation. It only took 400 years. So even though I'm a relative newcomer to this area, I feel like I have a duty of care to my museum and the people who call Mystic home. And just at first glance, that seemed to start with the Mashantucket Pequot people. Two, how can I put this? I kind of came into the museum field through the back door because I had lived as an artist for 20 years. And there were bigger things I wanted to do. I will go back in retirement to my own studio work, but right now I'm enjoying being able to put on not just exhibitions, but a year-long theme. I think we're one of the few museums that chooses, out of the range of human experiences that we all share, we choose a theme that people can relate to and that bring up important aspects of life today. It just so happens that the theme for 2025 is migration. The museum itself is the result of artists who, in the long-term effect of the French Revolution, they left centers of wealth and prestige and patronage, and they went to lovely places that fed their souls, but where they couldn't have patronage, where no one had any money. There was a whole movement of art colonies, starting in the Barbizon colony in France, moved all over America. That's one kind of migration. Another kind of migration that we have been coming to think about, this is point 3, was with the exhibition that we're doing, that just came down, unfortunately, with Expresiones at Mystic Museum of Art. The artists that showed there and the people who organized it, I will always be grateful to you, Jose and Guido. So much of that artwork was about stress and pain and loss and threat. There were wonderful expressions also of joy and connection, but those were always hooked onto the theme of resilience and overcoming obstacles. Why should that be? When you think, most of you, at least when I think, I'll put it this way, when I think of my ancestors, I'm thinking east to west migration. The largest migration the world has seen was from Europe and Asia and Great Britain to the shores of North America. And when we think of who our ancestors are, we're proud. People pretty much know what, for better or worse, German food is. They know what France is. They know what typifies Italy. Now, think of south to north immigration. We call it immigration, not migration. We politicize it. We assume that people may or may not belong in the United States. We see these themes in political discourse, in imagery, in the stories we tell, in the movies we watch. It's useless to pretend that doesn't exist. And yet, the same forces that bring people from the south to the north are the same that brought them from the east to the west. Why is there this difference? If I could casually talk about the difference between Italy and Spain, why should I not be able to talk about the difference between Uruguay and Paraguay? I can't. I just about know where they're located in the continent, and that's about it. So that's another feature of the exhibition that we just had, and that is a theme throughout the year. I think I have one more point. I'm trying to find it here. Oh, another is the last thing that I wanted to mention about my own experience was that while your physical location is part of your identity when you are displaced, so is your notion of language. And we have heard from Trevor Noah, for example, who wrote a wonderful memoir about growing up in South Africa, about how powerful it was to speak fluently no matter what community he was in. He's very adept at languages. When I lived for 2 years in France, I had to plan ahead, at first, the conversations I was likely to have and decisions I was likely to have to make, because it was not my mother tongue. And my sense of identity did not really get established until I had lived abroad for, I would say, a good year. Now, right, middle-class, white, female woman, I'm bound to be a little bit recessive, but it took a year. And when I think of people, last piece of my comment, when I think of people who have to make that kind of transition and who do not have the option to go home again, it really hits me hard. I think you're never going to get to that resting place that you're remembering. You have to create a new resting place for your heart and for your mind and for your soul. And for all of those reasons, it seemed that a year of different exhibitions, programs, workshops based on the theme of migration was only going to scratch the surface.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Indira, and I'm an immigrant. I was born in Chile, and I was born during a dictatorship in Chile. So things were very difficult in Chile at the time. I was lucky enough to live in a very small village that nobody really knew what was going on in the rest of the country. I mean, we knew it, but it was very calm in the middle of the hills, nature. So I had that peaceful within me, even though whenever you went to the city, it was very chaotic. It was a lot of disruption. During those years, I have to say I left Chile in '86. During those times, and dictatorship ended in '89. So that was like the last few years. It lasted from 71 to 89, so almost 20 years. So, so the last year was very complicated because people were starting to really be fed up with it and being very outspoken. So the streets were very, very violent, actually, from the same people. Violent, not in a way that you will be seeing people shooting to each other, but they're actually, people were just out on the street screaming very out loud about what they did not like about their situation of living anymore. And that became very violent with the actual police. So it was the people against the police. So, and it made it, I mean, people disappear, and I don't know if you guys know, but there's a big story, you can find it. But, so it's a lot of suffering within the same families. So families were very divided. Like political things were very like one side or the other, and all the families had the same thing. They all had somebody who was on one side, the other one was on the other side. So I lived that, and we actually learned how to really talk about that a lot, which was actually a great thing. You never have to agree to somebody, but you always have to talk about it. I think it was a thing that I got. And so we moved to the US, we moved to New Haven, Connecticut when I was 15 years old. And I finished high school like last 2 years, then I went to college. And then I moved within the States. I ended up moving to San Francisco because I thought the weather was nicer, closer to Chile. I was looking for things that, you know, I can feel more like within the flowers, the plants, the trees. They all remind me, the ocean, of course, remind me to Chile, like my home. And then I actually, after that, I decided to immigrate again, and I moved to Spain. So now I live in Spain for the last 6 years. So I have immigrated from place to place, sometime in Spain now, or in the position that I feel now that you can travel, I can become an expat and not an immigrant. It's another word to put in there. But I feel as an immigrant anywhere that I go, I will still be. Even when I go back to Chile, I'm an immigrant there as well, because of course things have changed there. I have changed. I am who I am because of my life patterns. So that's how immigration has made me to be who I am, and to learn what I have learned, which is great actually. I'm very happy about it. I'm happy that I have the opportunity to get to know other countries, even though it has It has happened because it was pushed to happen. My parents would have never left the Chile if they didn't have to. And I know this happened with many families, especially from Latin America. And so that's a little bit of my story as I'm an artist, and I travel a lot. And I have, in the last 2 years, I have decided to really do artist in residence in other countries. So I was able to do a lot of that in the UAE, the Middle East, and in Saudi as well. So I did that as well. And I try to always pick countries that I don't know anything about. I mean, I can always read, but once you get there, it's so different to things that you read about them. They're like, people there are just a different culture. They have a daily life with families, with kids, they go to school. The same things that we do here, everybody does it in their own countries. But you just do it in a different way as culturally. So I'm always looking to find places that I have never been, cultures that I don't know, maybe in language that I don't know either. Many of these languages I don't know. I only speak Spanish and English, some English. No, but I can, but I feel comfortable with people, regardless of the language. Maybe when you were talking about language, is many ways of having language, not only by verbal, but also the way we dress. Like, that's a huge one, especially when you think of the Middle East. You know, it's just completely different. So, so I'm just trying to think how I identify. I identify as an immigrant, and that has really made who I am. And I feel lucky many times that I'm able to move around like this. But because I realize now that I have moved so much, how hard it is for people to move and to go and just go into other cultures. And I think mainly it's because of fear. And I'm not sure what is the fear, because I don't think we should be afraid to other people, regardless of their anything, you know, their religions, their political aspect or anything. It's like, the more you can embrace people, and you can always learn more and make things. And I think this is the rich thing about the US. The one thing I think I always, being outside of the US, the one thing that I miss from here is the multiculture. It's listening to other language within the same room or in a subway. I don't get to hear this. Maybe, I mean, Barcelona is different because it's like so touristic. But if you're just in a small village, I miss hearing other people's language, even if I don't understand it. But that's multicultural that the US has. I don't see it anywhere else, which is kind of fantastic. I can see that you want to ask.
Yeah. How has like you being or your history of immigration from like place to place? How has that impacted your sense of home? Do you feel like there's a place where you're not an immigrant? If that makes sense.
You know, sometimes I feel too comfortable everywhere that I don't know if I have I feel like the world is my home. I feel lucky in that aspect because I know it's not easy, but it's probably something that I just have embraced. But I know it's something that is not easy for many people. I mean, even within my family, you know, I'm the only one that does these things.
You're one of the very few I can think of who does these things.
The rest of my family, they cannot even travel, you know, they just stay in the house and they don't, and they're scared to go. If I go, they're like, let me know when you're there so I can come. But I feel home and feel very comfortable actually being in other places that are not mine, that is completely different to mine, and that the language is also different. But I'm just very curious. That's the one thing
I
that
think the
keeps me.
difference though is that you're accepted no matter where you go. And for a lot of people that's not true, right? So the experience of moving to another place and being rejected immediately, right? Or feeling the pressure that they have to leave and find someplace else to leave. That's a completely different experience.
It's
So we'll get
very
into that
different,
later.
yes,
right?
yes, for sure.
We've all been very lucky.
Yeah, of course, I'm totally, and
favorite children
yeah,
of
it's a privilege. It's a complete privilege that we have to be able to be sitting here, you know, especially today, and be able to talk about this because many people in here, I mean, many family members that I have, you know, they can't, they're feeling the danger right now to just be out and have your face being in a screen or something. So, and that's a reality. But I think the one thing that we should, that I feel that this conversation is very important, is because we have to get close to each other. We have to really understand each other and not to be afraid. And that's why I just explain my life, because if you understand other people's life, you become closer to them, and then you create a community, and it's not danger. You know, because I feel that sometimes what is going on, like, it's almost like a persecution, you know, against immigrants. If they're legal, if they're not legal, if they're from Latin America, if they're from, regardless, it's almost like a persecution, but it's a lot of time because we have no idea of their lives, their days to day, how they got here. But I think that these are the things that really are gonna make us really understand each other in life. And and travel does that, I guess for sure for me has done it. To be able to be closer to other people, it has been traveling. I mean, I have traveled a lot. So that definitely brings me closer to people. And when you say people, it includes everybody. So I think these are the things that we need to really point out these days. Because it's not easy to be legal in this country. I came legally. We were lucky that we were able to come here legally. But it's a very difficult, there's not a path to become legal. I mean, I was able to become legal in Spain. Of course, I was married to Marc, but there's ways to become legal in Spain that you don't need to marry somebody. You don't need to have like millions of dollars to invest to become legal. There are legal ways to become legal. After 3 years, 4 years, you're paying your taxes, you're doing this, you do a process and you become legal. Nobody wants to be undocumented. No one wants to be undocumented because that's a fear for anybody working in this state, undocumented right now. And always, but I'll let Marc.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And I was born and raised in Barcelona, in Spain. And for a while, I worked in a circus, which allows me to travel the world. It took me to travel like pretty much 8 to 9 months being away at home. And this sparked my curiosity for photography. Of course, at the beginning, I was shooting, you know, landscapes and very, what I call postcards. Later on, I left the circus and I started formally working as a photographer. With this photo, I continued travel by some reason. I think something inside of myself, inside of, you know, in your guts, which you're curious about. You just want to know more. This takes me to a long-term project, which I decided to travel to Alaska and go across the continent on bicycle, which I carry all my photo gear, laptop, and a pair of pants and 2 t-shirts in the panniers, and I put it on the bicycle. And for several months, I went across Alaska, Canada, the United States. Going across San Francisco is where we met with Indira, and we decided to continue the trip together. I think the trip really started when in Mexico we were invited to share our experiences of photographies in this place like this one, you know. And the conversation, it turned into 3 hours conversation. But at the same time, we saw ourselves in this new environment, you know, where we were talking about the photographs, but at the time we were talking, we also discovered many things, you know. We just realized we went through 15 different countries, and we lived for 5 years in the bicycle. And what I really want to, or what connects this trip with the question we have here today is, it was in the market in Colombia, and with several people surround us, because the bicycles, the photo gear, whatever, and we, people was curious, they want to know more about our journey, and of course we want to know about them. And after 30 minutes, talking about different places, different adventures, blah, 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 a young boy, around 7, 8 years old, boy just stays next to us. Everyone left. And he looked to me and said, "Can I make a question?" I said, "Of course." He said, "What are you looking for?" And I thought, wow.
Fair point.
Why not how many flat tires, as everyone asks, What are you looking for? Well, I just don't want to say anything because he was a child, And then this question, it really, as person who is behind the camera and is aware or want to know what is in front of you, it took me to travel from the time I was in the circles and in Barcelona, where I lived for a while in Germany, and all this time traveling across America. I find out that what I was looking for was myself. It's not that I don't know who I am. It just took me to think about my role, my place. Why do you do what you do, And I wanted to connect with the question because it's also related to where I come from and what is the role in this journey, Because of course, you can be all your life just doing laps around the world without any meaning, But then, to find yourself, we can point it in many directions, but as Indira was mentioning, one is fear. Another one is when you know more about yourself, you can talk in front of a lot of people without not having a lot of knowledge about the language, but fear, knowledge, of course, is highly related or strongly related, but to find yourself, it's a key point of travel the world, but travel in a way where you have a mission. You know where you are. You are willing to even interpret or communicate with other people without speaking the same language. You can go back when I remember when I was living in Germany, they say, "No, just come here. Don't worry if you don't speak English, Or at the time when I worked with refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and of course I don't speak the language, and I developed this communication. I don't know if it's the right word. I think it's just a way to survive, I need to communicate. And then you look at each other, you look the eyes, the expression, how you move your body, and it's a way to communicate. And communication which we can build a kind of empathy which allow us to continue with this communication, with this trust, with this trying to know each other a little bit better and move forward with a better understanding each other. Well, I can speak here for hours. Any questions?
One of my favorite quotes from well, there's so many quotes from Mark Twain, but he said the cure for xenophobia is travel. And when you talk about just understanding yourself better, that to me feels like someone who is secure. And if you're secure in yourself, you don't have to make up stories about the people around you. You don't have to be afraid of what someone else thinks or what they presume or what's expected of you. And I think that a lot of us fall into, easily, in our culture anyway, it's easy to fall into a habit of meeting other people's expectations rather than deciding what we're looking for.
Well, by the time it's a constant transformation at the same time, you know. Going back to the fact of where you come from or where, of course I know where I'm coming from, but at the same time, as you know, when we ended up the street, we moved to leave to San Francisco, I thought, what I'm doing here, this is not my place. But at the same time, we build a kind of strong relation with people who also comes from different places in the world, and this is, I found in San Francisco, as many other places here in the United States. I thought, wow, this is my family, you know? So geographically, of course, we could say, yeah, that's where I come from. But I think you can build what I consider family based on your tribe. What I like to call it tribe, metaphorically speaking, but it is your community. And so now, well, yeah, I come from Barcelona, but my family, or sometimes I visit San Francisco, to see what I consider also my family. And I'm still building new families all over.
And I think one of the, oh, go ahead.
Now, I would like to add to give some perspective of the migrations. With human beings always migrated. You know, we started, you said, from west to east and south to north, but there was another one from north to south, which was when the people in Asia, what is Asian today, crossed the Bering Strait and went down up to South America, to Tierra del Fuego, where I come from. So migrations, you know, they're very, seeing in a very wide perspective, human beings always migrate, and they will keep doing that. Why? What is the driving force to migrate? Is to look for better lives for your children, mostly. I think the parents that migrate sometimes sacrifice themselves to give their parents a better place to live. What means a better place? A place where they can find safety, love, health, education, the most important things in life, okay? And so I come from, for example, I am also an immigrant. I came from Argentina. I was born in Buenos Aires in Argentina. But I consider myself from American, but American in the sense of the whole the whole continent, American continent, North, Central, and South America. I was able to travel all around that area, and I feel confident in any of those places, any country in the American continent. So that is that I want to tell you about what the migrations is. Always we are going to have migrations. People will. I want to another little details about this. I come from Argentina, and I was born in the 1950s. Okay, I'm almost 70. I was educated there. I consider that I have a good education, and But Argentina went through many, many troubles in the last 20 years. And something very bad, very sad is happening. A lot of people of your age, of the 20s, 30, educated, mostly educated people, are migrating again. So their parents and grandparents went from Italy, Spain, Germany to Argentina and to other countries in America to get a better life. And then their children and grandchildren are migrating again to Europe. Then I'm thinking, maybe people who come to US in 20 years, 30 years, your kids maybe, will come back to wherever they come from. Because maybe it is better. Nobody knows that, you know. So the bottom line is, we think that we belong to a place, but we belong to a place where we feel safe, love, and possibility education, and possibility for your children. That is the most important driving forces for me.
I think what you're talking about, though, there are two types of migration. One for groups that are looking for better lives, better economies, safer places to live, places that their children can go to school and learn without being repressed and so forth. But then there's the other migration that's forced because of violence, because of gang violence, whether it's war and not having any economic possibility at all where you're living. So that's more of what we're seeing in the last 4 decades, right? And migration as a touchstone then for world unrest. And it really does focus in on what's going on around the world and why it's happening in different countries. People throw their hands up and say, I don't understand why are there so many people now trying to migrate, and why are they coming from a third of the world's population between 2019 and 2022 migrated. That's a lot of people moving in different areas. And it's not that they're selecting those countries, right? That they think, I'd love to move to Spain. That would be great. It's not that they have those options. So they're taking options that are available to them. They're doing their research. And the research isn't that complicated anymore because of the cell phone, right? And they're seeing things on the cell phone, like the American lifestyle looks really cool, right, on our cell phone. So I'd like to go there. I'd like to explore the opportunities there. Most of the migration that came to the United States, and there's a wonderful article that my friend Jerry recommended from the New York Times from last week, talking about migrations, right, and how they're moving from one place to the other. It was in an opinion piece in the New York Times, and how most of them are coming from Latin America from 2019 to 2022-23. They're coming through Latin America to the United States. We are the global hub, right, for most of the migration. That doesn't surprise us, because we see it affecting our politics, it affects our history, it affects the way people interact or don't interact, it affects the way people are afraid to talk to each other, or they've just heard so much from the other side they don't want to hear it anymore, right? So it's not something new, but what they are doing is they took research from Harvard, from Meta, and from another university outside the United States. They're seeing where those flows are going, right? Where they're moving. And I would also recommend, if you're interested in going back a few decades, to Paul Kennedy's article in The Atlantic, when he talked about "Must It Be the Rest Against the West?" is the title of the article. He's a historian at Yale and worked on this topic for many, many years. if we continue to have these divisions, right, we're always going to have upheavals, we're always going to have migrations that are not planned, right, and that there are no solutions for. So that's another piece that started, again, 1990s. He's talking about as globalization is heating up, how does that affect the rest of us? Right? And then you have the sociologist, the book that he wrote, Planet of Slums, fascinating study. In 2006, Mike Davis wrote the book about how these mega cities are just growing out of nowhere. Buenos Aires, right? The population, everybody's moving from the suburbs into the capital. Santiago de Chile, if you go to Santiago, right, right from the airport all the way to the center of the city, it's all one right after the other. India, just so many different areas that they're working on, but it's complicated. So Latin America is the first to send immigrants to the United States in the last few years. India is the second group, right, that's immigrating to the United States. So we can look at it and look at those flows from up ahead on top. Some of the smaller countries are also accepting. Chile is accepting people from Ecuador and Venezuela. You will see that, right? But the other aspect of it is, what do we do about it, right? We're seeing it now. How do we do something about it that's positive instead of just destroying institutions? How do we create institutions, right? And this, my last comment on this was Paul Kennedy's idea. Well, we decided as countries that we would donate a certain percentage of our gross national income to this pool, right? And then the countries that needed it would take some of that money and start to develop institutions, right, that would make life easier, the economy improve, that students would be educated and so forth. So if we all did that, if we shared the wealth that way, then the level of life and the quality of life would improve all over the world. And you wouldn't have to have migration because you can't get what you need or you can't be safe in your own country. And then finally, one more point I just remembered, and then I'll turn it over to you, Leo, is the Rotary Positive Peace Academy. You can go online, look that up, it's free. Rotary International, which does Polio Plus. We're working very hard to eradicate polio throughout the world. There are just 2 countries where it's prevalent or it exists now, but the rest of the world is free of polio. Rotary Positive Peace Academy talks with the Institute for Economics and Peace in Australia. They talk together about how to create these institutions of peace. Can they exist, right, alongside other countries where there are warring and they have battles, but what are the solutions? How can we look at solutions for the future?
So I think, this is really wonderful, and I encourage everybody, right, to get involved, because we all have a story about immigration, migration, right? One of the beautiful things about, the trip that you guys are talking about was a sort of a geographic trip, but it also became kind of a spiritual journey, right? And coming to terms and knowing yourself. And through our engagement with our own connection to migration and immigration, we travel over time as well, right? We can make that trip over time, we can travel over time, and then I think when we do that, we recognize that our most basic connection that binds all of us is that we're humans, and what do? Humans move. Humans find resources, humans move. And I think when we embrace the idea that movement of people can be exacerbated by crises, by inequalities and so forth, but that the human condition is one of movement. And when we embrace that, and we see movement not as an indicator of crisis or instability, but rather as normalcy, transhumance, right? Humanness over long distances, of small groups, of large groups, is very normal, very natural in the course of human history, which is really a very short period of history on the planet. And we're gonna see more of that, right, as there are more people and there are more strains and resources with climate change and so forth. So I think if we first begin by embracing the movement of people as not something that's a crisis, not something that's necessarily negative, right? There can be aspects of it, right, that can be negative in a moment. What makes human movement a crisis is when you create national borders and you create sets of laws that don't allow people to regularize their movement across those borders. That's when you hit a manufactured crisis, right? And we see this administration manufacturing exacerbating a crisis, getting political. They don't want to solve any of these problems. This is good political engineering, right? They don't have to deal with education. They don't have to deal with jobs. They don't have to deal with the climate change, the things that really matter to all of us, because they can distract us with this other show, right? And so humans are always going to move. They're always going to pursue the opportunities that are there, and they're going to make those connections. The greatest power for redistribution of wealth in the world today is remittances. Immigrants themselves are creating the flows of resources and redistributing those resources so that other people don't have to move, so that they can remain where they are, right? The right to remain where you are and choose not to move is fundamentally important. The right to move is fundamentally important, fundamentally human. And I encourage all of you to explore your own and share with us now, to the extent to which you're willing and comfortable to do it, right? Your own kind of engagements with those histories, right? I teach classes in the first session, and this summer I'll be teaching a class in immigration and migration, right? To and from Latin America to other places, right? I'll teach it again in the fall as a 15-week course as well. And oral history is the main component, right? So all the students in that class, whenever we teach it, they're exploring an oral history in their own family, in somebody that they know, in their community that they're in, or something they know nothing about but they want to discover, right? And the basic thing is that everybody has an immigration, migration story, right? Because that's what makes us human. And you know, now, it may be one that's being buried, it's maybe one that's being forgotten, it's maybe one that's linked to a lot of trauma and it's not a comfortable story to share, but it's always there, right? And we empower ourselves by getting closer to that, right? In my family, in my case, it's trying to move against that erasure, to embrace both the positiveness of Americanization, but also to recognize the forces, the negative forces that created that Americanization within my family, right? So I encourage all of you to definitely delve into that, right? I think, you know, take the fear out of movement. Don't allow the people that are trying to whip up your fear, your concern, and so forth, right? You know, almost any indicator that is given to you by politicians or the media that creates fear. Oh, immigrants are from criminal gangs, right? The immigrant population is the sector in the United States that has the lowest criminal rates of any other group, right? But that's not what you would think if you read the press, right? Or listen to the press or listen to the politicians, right? So you have to kind of work against that, right? Xenophobia is also a very human characteristic, right? Is sort of what you were talking about, you know, the tribe, finding one's tribe, right? That kind of tribalistic behavior, right? That, you know, us versus them, that othering, that's also a very normal human characteristic, right? So we should push against it. Go for it.
I think that we're missing something that we should really pay attention to. And that is that immigrants are weak. They're not strong. They fled because they couldn't eat, or they couldn't work, or they couldn't grow their crops because of a variety of factors. So yes, the Philippines, the bulk of its GDP is remittances. You're absolutely right. On the other hand, there are countries like Germany that desperately need labor and let the Turks come in to Germany, and Volkswagen sponsored most of that immigration. And countries that are smart and self-aware seem to be able to handle immigration. But our country is being remarkably stupid and unself-aware because we too have a labor problem. And we have labor solutions. And the labor solutions right now are illegal immigrants that we're refusing to make legal. But when those people are gone, and they're already happening, ICE is attacking barns, and people are running away and not milking the cows anymore. So I think countries need an enlightened approach to immigration. And some countries, like Germany, when we had a woman, the Consul General, come and say, we need even more immigrants. We want them to come. And that's what ought to be said in our country. We need immigrants. We want them to come.
We are immigrants.
But
What are we
instead,
if we're not?
of course we are, but instead we're saying, no, we don't want you, which is so self-destructive. It's,
Well, even Germany though, there are people, yes, that say, yes, we need immigrants, we need workers and so forth. And there are others that say, no, but they're stealing our jobs and they're cooking their food out in the parks and we can't have this. That's not German, right? So these are issues that are going on all over the world.
People. I mean, it's a movement just as it is here. So I mean, it wasn't that way during the Syrian movement and the Turkish movement.
yeah, they let the Syrians in by the million.
Million Syrians, right?
But you're not necessarily a citizen if you're born there, right?
That's right.
Germany is not.
They worked it out. They didn't have any law that made, how you become a naturalized German.
Right.
But they worked it out so that you
Well, there are no legal channels for
And then
that.
they speeded up, like 2 years ago, they were speeding up the process, so it wasn't 8 years anymore, it was 5
And
years.
Europe in general, I think, has a more sophisticated approach to immigration than our country does. The EU has got a more sophisticated approach.
Of course, they're only one election away from somebody who
Right.
thinks differently, Le Pen or something else.
Well, so were we.
Exactly.
No, we've already had that already.
I'm saying
Are there
we
any
were.
student
That was-
questions that you'd like to ask? Yeah.
I was wondering what you guys think about like English being the primary and almost singular like academic language and what the effects of that are on like identity formation, especially in like K through 12, when we see a lot of like code switching between like the social and academic language and how that impacts identity.
That's a great question. And I've taught a course in genetics, flag section in Spanish, and doing the research for that, I realized that if you are a Latin Americanist, a scientist, you cannot publish in your own language. You have to publish in English, and that's probably true throughout most of the world. The scientific community shares everything in English, and that's very frustrating for people in other countries that are at the top of their field, right? But they may go to conferences and not feel comfortable about giving papers in English. So it is something that we're seeing that distinguishes people or keeps them separate, and it does also keeps them in certain categories. That's unfair, it seems.
But that may change. That may change. Before the Second or First War, the scientific language was German, and the diplomatic language was French. Now it's English, but who knows what is going to be in 100 years? Maybe Chinese,
It's gonna be
maybe
Mandarin.
Chinese.
It's
And
gonna be Mandarin.
Could be, right?
But we're touching on what the culture
There was
wars are
another
about.
student question.
Yeah, I was wondering, why is that a bad issue if there's a common language that all the people can like share their knowledge and ideas? Because if that's not the case, how would knowledge be shared differently?
I couldn't hear it.
I didn't quite
I
understand.
couldn't hear you, I'm sorry.
Why is it bad that it's English is a dominant language?
Not English specifically, why is it bad there's this dominant language in general?
Ah, okay.
I think if there was a shared language, right, that people could equally access, that would be great, right? But if there's one language out of many, right, is then imposed, right, then we have the situation, right, where children going to school, like my grandfather, right, bringing, as you know, some scholars talk about like the invisible backpack, right? His language knowledge, his stories, his experience, all of those things that were important he brought to school, and he wasn't allowed to take a single one of those out of his backpack. In fact, he was punished for having that backpack, right? And so there we go, right? We undermine the potential, right, of kids from an early age, right? And in the U.S. academic community, if we don't know, right, how to access, right, academic material and research in other languages, right, we cut ourselves off, right?
It depends on how exclusive that universal language is.
Exactly.
Is what I'm hearing you
Yeah.
say.
I think it's if we could design a way.
Well,
to share.
AI will take care of it for us.
No, you're right, you're right.
Maybe.
But you know, talk to your Latino friends here at the college. They couldn't, in high school, speak Spanish in the school unless they were in a Spanish class. It was not permitted, right? So these are issues that, as Leo was saying, that they're losing their culture, or they have a very negative feel about that, because they weren't allowed, or their friends don't know anything about it and they don't care about it, they weren't allowed to share that with others. It wasn't valued.
But it is not because they are not allowed. I am a Latino and have nephews whose first language, they learned Spanish from when they were little kids. But when they start going to school, their language is English. Because it's the language of the community. It's the language they speak, television and so on. So basically the problems of the family, of Latin families, is their kids don't speak Spanish. They speak English. They speak Spanish with a very strong accent. And that happened until they are in their 20s. When in their 20s, they look around and say, oh, my roots are Latin. And they have what I call the Latin attack. And they start learning Spanish like crazy, listen to Latin music like that. And that happened with one of my nephews. Now they speak Spanish like me almost, but later, when they are in the 20, 25.
There's a question in the back.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I wholeheartedly agree. That's me right now. I'm Latin attack. I have a different question. How do we begin to have discourse around migration, immigration, and to break down the arguments of people who demonize that? And I don't necessarily. It's okay that people have different views, obviously, but once we start to like attack that, how do we change that narrative?
That's a great question. And you know, that's part of the solution.
I think that one thing we're gonna have to be able to embrace, and that we haven't talked about yet, is the effect of global warming on movement of peoples and on the distribution of wealth and on resources. And in a world that can't even, is only now beginning to recognize that climate change is a reality, it becomes very difficult to decide, okay, so who gets, if you can't farm in your region of Africa, where should you go? And a question that comes up among artists, among academics, among thinking people is, who gets to decide where you belong? Who gets to decide that? So we have the whole US history of the Middle Passage, bringing slaves from Africa and other countries to the US. We can't even begin to talk about language because the coded language of Black USA is different from the coded language of academic USA, which is different from ghetto USA. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. But until I really appreciate your question, because I think until we're ready to recognize the inequities that exist in this world, we can't address them because we're so busy investing ourselves. I think it was you, Leo, saying, we're building up all these reasons not to talk about the really difficult problems. I think what you're asking is right at the heart of the problem.
Absolutely. I mean, we have our elites are planning their exit. They're 1%. They're going to go to Mars or Greenland or someplace like that. But they're going to leave the rest of us, right, to fight it out, I guess, right? And so it's really gonna have to be, I mean, it's your generation, right? The people in this, the majority of the people in this room, right? That I think in many ways are gonna have to decide what's the world we wanna live in, right? Is it a world of fear and building walls and trying to reinforce, you know, national boundaries and use the wealth and the power to fight against the very natural and commendable human need to move when things are untenable where they are? Or are we gonna look at, say, for instance, immigrants in a different way? I believe that immigrants aren't the weakest, right? Particularly immigrants that make it as far as the United States. They're tremendously resourceful, powerful, successful individuals or family units that are able to make it right here. Right? I think that, you know, when we see like the growth of cities into mega cities, right? People with fewer resources and opportunities and ingenuity and skill are going to be people who are not going to be able to move as far. So you're going to see them moving internally within countries. But people that travel across continents, people that travel to other countries, are going to be among those kinds of people that have the skill sets that are going to help us figure out a way to deal as humanity with global warming, with the dislocations, with the changes, with the unexpected, that are going to be in code switching. Instead of being seen as something negative, the kid that's able to pull upon a couple of different ideas and traditions, think about things in at least two different words and so forth, those are going to be the skills. That kind of elasticity, I think, right, and creativity is going to be what helps us as a species confront this challenge, which is looming larger. But we're going to have to struggle against the forces that don't want to see, right, immigrants, don't want to see people from different backgrounds and different ideas, that don't want to see us as having a shared challenge, right, in humanity. And that's not just like a Trump invention, right? I mean, there's plenty of people that feel that way in both parties, unfortunately, and we're a two-party system, right? And so there are things we have to do to get outside of the boxes that we've been pushed into. I would say, I mean.
Yeah, I think what you have to look for is that theme that, or that topic that they have in common. So you're going to have these two different groups of migrations, those people that are legally can start the process from another country and then move right in, and then you're going to have the other group that they overcome such adversity and are amazingly able to reach the shores. Whether it's the Chinese migrants that came to New York instead of going the other way, the flows are so extraordinary. But what they need to have perhaps is this in the conversation is something that unites them, those two different groups. And one thing might be climate change, right? It's affecting everybody. So what do we do about it? How do we handle it? And if we put too many people in a certain area where there's not enough water and there's not enough food, a lot of people, 1 in 4, are living with food scarcity, then we're exacerbating the problem, right? So at that point, we have to have these conversations across groups, right? We have to reach over to the other side and say, where is it? Where are you going? Why are you going there? And how can we help? What are the different possibilities here, right? And how can we solve that problem?
I always see things differently, so I'm going to share my opinion. It's very difficult sometimes for me to say this, but I don't disagree with anything that's been said. But the 3 immigrants who spoke had very positive things of their life through this experience. And I am always, and I would think for the students, especially here listening to this, it must be like kind of doom and gloom, like, what are we gonna do? This is horrible. And I always am the person that says, what can I do? What can I do? Mm-hmm. I have a daughter who has traveled all over the world. She's in the Himalayas as we speak. And I've traveled places, and I always kind of get with the local people. I love learning their culture. I like being a part of it. And I think that, you can say trying to get everyone to talk about climate change. And if that hasn't worked in I don't know how many years, but there's hydroponics. There's other ways of dealing with parts of the country that are gonna have that. And the only thing that I wanted to add is that there are a lot of smart kids today with science, with math, to go out there, instead of worrying about what are they doing, how do I change it, you can look at what can I do. Maybe you can figure out a better way of sourcing water, using charcoal to clean water, to do other things. And I just think that that's the, you know, when you said things that aren't being talked about, that's what I hear. I think everybody has an ability to do something. And I think if you look at, you know, the problem with everything, and are you Republican, Democrat, everything's being so divided. And I think if we could somehow get past that and come together, and I don't care if it's 5 people, it doesn't have to be the entire, if you can't get the entire world, you get 5 friends that are smart and say, you know what, we can fix whatever it is that's the most important thing to you. And I just think that, I don't hear that conversation. And to me, that feels very sad. I hear things that, and I'm an adult, and I sometimes feel like, oh my God, this is horrible. And I think, you know, with a lot of things going on with mental health, I think there's a lot of things people can do, but they just don't feel empowered because of the conversations that we hear. And I don't listen to either side of you know, Democrats, Republicans, Trump, I don't care. I don't listen to any of them.
So what would be, it's an interesting point, and how would you empower? How can you, what?
I think if there's something that's important to you, I love communicating. Something I love to do. So I reach out. There was where I used to live, there was a Chinese school. And there was an old Chinese gentleman walked by my house and just started trying to practice. I just sat and talked with him. I don't speak, he didn't really speak English, but it was just, that was the one thing that I could do. And I think there's people here that I'm sure have incredible talent, but don't feel comfortable because sometimes that feels overwhelming. I know as an adult, that is overwhelming. And if I just say, well, what can I do? If you're a science major, you're in the environment, there's always an answer outside of the box. But if you keep hearing everyone tell you no, 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 you're never gonna attempt it. And we have people now doing amazing things, trying to clean our ocean, trying to fix our water, keep it cleaner, work on the environment. It's a start, but I have to believe those people just started saying, I don't care what they say, I know I can do this. And they take a step. And I just think that's a really huge missing piece right now. And I think sometimes that conversation becomes, again, the only word I can think of is overwhelming. And there's a lot of people that are depressed, that have anxiety. And I think a lot of it comes from that, the feeling of you can't do anything.
And I think part of the problem might be how hard it is to choose that one problem.
But it doesn't, you know, I don't think you have to choose anything that you work on with other people to find a solution is perfect, right? Because the only way we're gonna tackle big problems is to learn how to tackle smaller problems.
Right.
And the only way we're gonna learn how to tackle, you know, the small problems and the big problems is working together. So anything that we learn, so we can take any of those steps, and most of our students are pretty involved in doing different things, right? And working together with other people. And I think if people just keep doing that, that's gonna build the skills that allow you then to work in what larger and larger collectives to deal with larger and larger problems.
Well, and I agree with you, but my point is that based on, of course, my experience, I think, especially now, we are so lost in translation. We don't even speak, even here, if everyone's speaking the same language, English, we don't understand each other, you know. Some amazing projects, truly amazing projects, about anything, migration, global warming, whatever, the communication with the farmers, the bureaucracy, it's so complicated that even though they come out with great ideas, great projects, is this misunderstanding. is this lack on communication. And especially when it's happening right now, people in power is taking advantage of that. And that's exactly what's happening in the world right now, you know?
But in my backyard, with people in my community, we can do one thing. And that sometimes is enough just to get started and make you start to feel that empowered. Everything came from a grassroots. Most things.
That's what we're trying to say. Maybe we, the idea is to reach out to other people, something that you're interested in. It doesn't have to be climate change, it could be anything, right? On a human level, something that you're interested in, you think you can make a difference, that is wonderful. That's the idea. So that you're not, we have another question, but so that you're not stagnating, right? And not having that conversation.
This is more just a comment, but I think something that's really hard about the individual responsibility piece is that we all can absolutely do something, but I think especially even we're having this conversation at Connecticut College, we're a PWI, mostly white students, we might have the ability to do something personally, but a frustrating part of the conversation is that that's not true for many people. So when we talk about things like everything can start by a conversation and teamwork, but when we talk about people that are making changes in clean water, things like that, for the most part, those aren't really accessible solutions, and that conversation isn't accessible to everybody, especially when we're talking about migration in this conversation. Things like that, we can assume that we all have an individual role and responsibility in it, but who can actually make change and who's invited to that conversation, I think, is a really difficult piece of it when we're asking people to step up and make change without actually providing them the resources to live their own lives and then be able to create more for us.
Yeah, we'd like to be able to say, this is gonna be easy, don't worry about it. Yes, I see.
I just say we shouldn't underestimate local communities reaching out, and that includes the churches, which are doing a lot with immigration, and a great many more churches than not are alongside immigrants. And my church in Clinton took an Afghan family that walked the Darien Gap with children in their arms, without papers or documentation, but they did make it into Clinton, and they heard that there was a place they could go, and they were admitted to the rectory where they're still living, and it's being regularized for them, and that congregation is standing beside them, and they're going to make it. And that's not a rare thing. We need to hear these stories. It's going on. These are things we can do and are doing. We are doing them. And they have a human face.
I think that during a time like this is when you have to really get closer to your local community, really local. Don't go out to, you don't need to go to New York for it. You don't need to go to, New Haven. Just stay even within, in the backyard.
You're right.
Stay close to your local community, have conversations, talk about migration, talk about anything that you really like, or maybe something in politics, maybe not. You have to be speaking all the time about politics, even though it's always on us. But I think the most important thing right now is to stay connected and to really engage with each other as humans. Because anything that could happen, or anything that has happened, there's history, and things like this have happened along Latin America. The only people that stay with you is always the people that is next to you, within your community, the one that you feel safe. So, and the one that you can talk to easily. Because sometimes it becomes times that it's hard to even talk to people. But I think the one thing that we need to really get into now is talk to your, just go out in the yard for your lunch and have conversation about immigration and put your opinion, what you know, maybe it's correct, maybe it's not correct, but if you start talking about it, you will get other people's opinion, experience, know how people have immigrated, why they immigrated. A lot of times the people that left Latin America and the Middle East, it was because of political things that the US had a lot of hands into it. for them to move out of their countries. So it's not just because they shows, many times just find information about that. So it's an understanding why these people move here. It's not because they wanted to live in the US many times. I mean, many times they live in the Caribbean and they come to live. But what I'm saying is just stay local, stay in your community, and engage with each other. Get to know somebody else. So.
Okay, we are finishing with Indira. Basically, Indira is wrapping this conversation. The main idea of this conversation is not to finish now. It's impossible to finish. This is just the very beginning. It's opening the door. Then this is the invitation for each of you. You are taking this conversation to your house, to your friends, to your family, and we are starting from there. This is a long way to do. Okay? Then I want to invite you to say thank you for Leo, Julia. We have some finger food outside. If you want to stay a bit longer, you can still talk with the panelists, and we are still there, okay?
One thing, I would like to tell you young people, you are